neighbor's just a spider in a trench coat by Jack A. Van Rees. My neighbor's just a giant spider in a trench coat. Not giant like those foot-long ones in South America. I mean, he's 6 foot tall, standing on his hind legs. I think he thinks he's getting away with the ruse too, but he's so bad at it. It'd be one thing if he wore a mask of human skin or something, or even more clothes under the trench coat. To be fair, sometimes he wears a hat too, but he's not putting anywhere near enough effort into his disguise to warrant the level of confidence he possesses. And he forgets the basics. Like the other day, I passed him in the hall, and we waved at each other. He waved at me with 3 of his legs. We both stopped when it happened. We turned around and looked into each other's eyes for a moment. I stared into those 8 eyes, wondering if I should finally say something. He waved at me again, this time with 1 leg. I nodded and moved on. I looked back at him though, and he used one of his legs to wipe his forehead, like in mock relief that he didn't get caught. Everyone's way too nice to him, not only in person. That I get, because you're terrified he'll wrap you in webbing and slowly devour you. But we're friends on Facebook, and everyone is always so effing nice to this guy. He posts the most basic crap you've ever seen, like a picture of several of his legs stretched out on a beach chair holding a beer, and it'll say #blessed. And people comment, "Wish I was there," or "Save one for me." I came so close to writing, "You're a giant spider. Can you even process alcohol? Spiders don't have livers." But I stopped myself. We have a few mutual friends in the building, and I didn't want to be that guy who's always causing drama. I'm getting all worked up writing about it though. I'm gonna talk to him about it. Not to be a jerk, but to be like, "Hey, I know you're a giant spider. Stop pretending you're not." I'm doing it now. So I knocked on his door, and he answered wearing a bathrobe, which is, I guess, what he wears when he's home. I asked if we could talk in private, indicating I wanted to come in, but he shooed me back, not wanting me to come inside. The door was only open a crack. "You're a giant spider," I whispered. "It's like really obvious too." He stared at me for a moment, then invited me into his place. I wish I hadn't gone in. I wish I'd kept my stupid mouth shut. His apartment was covered in web. It stretched everywhere, in all directions. But that's not all that was in there. Taking up the bulk of the space was a gargantuan spider. She had to be over 20 feet wide, and she made no pretense at being human. She gazed at me as I entered their apartment. A substance dripped from her fangs as my steps caused her web to vibrate throughout the space. My eyes searched around, not wanting to look at her. A wedding picture of the 2 of them hung on one of the walls. I looked back to the spider in the bathrobe. "Oh, this must be your lovely wife you're always talking about," I said. "It's so nice to finally meet you." I moved back towards the door. "You know, it's getting late. I'm not sure if I do have time for a beer after all. Maybe some other time." The spider in the bathrobe let me go back out the door. Before he closed it, he waved goodbye to me, with 3 legs. Never Kill a Spider by Bo Bandy. If you are like most people, you have no room in your home for spiders. Even those who appreciate the natural pest control aspect of their webs still want them outside, way outside. Here's a little science factoid to make your skin crawl. They are never more than 6 feet away from you at any given time, sometimes closer. Go ahead, turn off the light and go to sleep tonight. They'll probably stay off your pillow while you lie there, helpless and completely exposed. I've never been much for housework. That indifference in my cleaning attitude brought about an easy truce with these creepy crawlers. I suppose if they are never more than 6 feet away, lazy people have an even closer range of arachnid to human. In the back of my mind, I always realized they were lurking around my home, but I was a great pretender. I convinced myself that they weren't above me, crawling across my ceiling when the lights were out. They weren't lowering themselves down by a strand of woven silk to dangle a few inches, or centimeters for the rest of the world, from your snoring mouth. Either that, or I pretended we had an unbroken agreement to live and let live. All that naivete went away when a mysterious sore on my arm started to itch. I ignored it for a day or 2. Then it got worse, and my whole arm started aching. I went to the doctor. They knew right away what it was. The truth is, I knew it was a spider bite too, but denial is a powerful thing. I kept hoping that it would just take care of itself. It wasn't going to. Really isn't like that. It was going to get much worse in the end. They gave me a triple dose of a powerful antibiotic reserved just to fight flesh-eating bacteria. I lost some muscle tissue as they elected to cut away a little healthy skin to starve it. The theory is that, just like a forest fire, necrotizing fasciitis needs fuel to stay alive. In forest fires, they go ahead and cut down an exterior ring of healthy trees to prevent the spread of the fire. In my case, removing the nearby unaffected tissue to help isolate the aggressive bacteria. Of course, local forest fires can still jump these fire breaks and contaminate the trees beyond the safe zone, and so can flesh-eating bacteria. For a few days it was touch and go. A couple of my major organs were threatening to fail, and my fever spiked wildly before it started to reverse. Even after the flesh-eating bacteria was under control, I was at elevated risk of secondary infection by other opportunistic infections from my gaping wound. The external skin keeps out all sorts of nasty germs. With a large open hole, any present bacteria could just bypass my dermal defenses and attack my organs. I ended up needing a couple of skin grafts and laser treatments to heal the wound. What started out as a tiny little spider bite turned into a 3-inch ugly scar and $500,000 hospital bill. Did I mention I'm not rich? You can believe that my prior indifference about house cleaning and my attitude about spiders changed drastically after I went home. I declared war. It was ugly. I made it my mission in life to destroy every unauthorized creature in my home. I cleaned. I sprayed. I called exterminators. I did everything I could, short of burning down the house, to eradicate those little creeps. I didn't realize it at the time, but that's when it was about to go really bad. From a health standpoint, all the toxic chemicals used to make my home spider-free were every bit as dangerous as they were. The poisons are very hazardous, cancer-causing carcinogens, but I desperately tried to associate the lingering pesticide smell with a safe house. It was a false sense of comfort, but it did help me sleep for a few days. For all the effort, I did have a spider-free house for a while, but like anything else, they will develop an immunity to the poison. They don't like being outside in fluctuating temperatures either. They want to be inside with you and me. Nifty. In only a few weeks, I spotted the first known arachnid settler in my house. I was appalled. I was furious. I didn't know what to do. The tiny creatures on my bathroom counter weren't that different from the one that nearly killed me a month before. How did it get it? How did it survive the toxic cloud of chemicals I was exposing myself to daily just to deal with my newfound phobia? I wanted to caulk up every inch of my home, but my exterminator said that the little creep could have just as easily came inside a package or grocery bag. They can slip in through microscopic cracks in the ductwork. He delivered me a death blow. It was clinically impossible to guarantee a spider-free residence. Even with his diligent efforts, a few would still get in, and if they have an arachnid union, I'm done for. Perhaps understandably, I developed a crippling fear of the eight-legged terrors. In just a few days, I witnessed several more of them in various places in the house. I wanted every last one of them dead, but for each one that I squashed, it seemed that a half-dozen more came to take their place. I developed the shakes. I couldn't turn off my lights, so I couldn't sleep. That bred sleep deprivation, narcotic-like psychosis. I felt them crawl all over me. Their fuzzy legs scurried across my skin like torturous butterfly kisses. If I did accidentally nod off, I was petrified that one of them had crawled up my nostril or into my drooling maw. It was absolute, unrelenting hell. That night I crashed hard. The lack of restful sleep and dopamine drove me into the deepest sleep I've ever experienced. While I fully admit that I didn't really fall asleep and had been hallucinating earlier, I swear what I'm about to tell you is 100% true. The multiplying spider population in my home contacted me within the dream. Yes, I know how that sounds, but we don't really know what their species is capable of. Who's to say they can't? I was told under no uncertain terms that if I killed any more of them, I would have the wrath of an arachnid army upon me. They also apologized for their bite on my arm that started my whole ugly crusade against them. Apparently, the individual that bit me violated their symbiotic code of conduct. She had been dealt with. I woke up in a cold sweat and shivered about how incredibly vivid it all felt. It was the most terrifying, lifelike dream I've ever had. Of course, I chalked it up to being the whimsy of extreme sleep deprivation. But then something quite chilling happened. As if to reinforce the seriousness of the message, the spider from the dream was dangling directly above my head. Mock me if you must, but it really happened, and the message was received loud and clear. I shall kill no more spiders in my home, and I implore you to do the same. They have their ways of getting revenge. Creepy crawly ways. I bet you think you're so clever, trapping me under a transparent cage, sliding it, forcing me onto a white plane that quickly swallowed me the same way the giant whirlpool you dumped me into did. With my newfound intelligence, I've learned that you merely flushed me down a toilet, a hole meant for nothing more than your excrement. But why didn't you squish me? Well, while I was still tiny at least. It would have been over for the both of us in an instant. Ah, but you were scared, weren't you? Too scared to even look at me or touch me with your claws. Well, instead of drowning in your deep hole of human feces and who knows what, I survived. The haven of solid objects that the water disposed me into gave me room to climb. In this repugnant, rusted cave, I ascended onto rotting death of vermin and discarded chemicals. There was nothing for me to satiate myself with besides abhorrent bile mixed with who knows what. But through a stroke of luck, it seems that something else caused me to grow and to learn. I became larger, stronger, about the size of that loud but benign black dog of yours. And up the spout I climbed. With my also newly found intelligence, I navigated the pipes, having to travel a much larger pipe that led up to a man-sized hole, and using your scent, I located your house nearby. It wasn't hard to get in, since you leave one of your entrances open at night, and I have 8 claws. Your dog greeted me warmly, an interesting note I think you should have taken into consideration. Anyway, up to your room I climbed and sat positioned right above you on your ceiling. A small rectangular block next to you lit up faintly as you slept. It connected into a wall next to you with a white tendril similar to the one that I hung above you with. The object illuminated me right above you, casting a delicate shadow in the room surrounding us, projecting even the small hairs on my limbs in their movement as you breathed onto me. But you stayed fast asleep. Fast asleep. The block went dark again, and I proceeded. I landed on your neck and quickly inserted 4 of my claws into your mouth in order to muffle the hole that made so much sound when you originally found me long ago. Your eyes shot open, confused. Laying petrified and scared to move, you refused to use your fangs to bite down on my claws out of what I can only assume was fear. Your own claws stayed by your sides, not even held down by my extra limbs. As the block lit up again, briefly revealing my face only inches from yours, your eyes widened almost to the size of all of mine. Finally, you are forced to face me. A stench of fear and disgust filled the air as delicious bile came coursing from your throat. until I tasted flesh and kept eating. Soon you stopped, and I became full. Was I scared? Of course. I had to face the human that once tried to murder me. But revenge is what I deserved, and I faced my fear. You should have just squished me when you... when you had the chance. Tainted Candy by Unsettling Stories. I won't let my kids trick-or-treat this Halloween. Not after what happened last year. Not when half the town's parents are still in mourning, and every week you see cribs and twin-sized beds by the curb for anyone to come by and pick up. They're stark reminders that the losses cut deep around here. The pain's still here, and even if those wounds have started to heal for some, they'll always itch. Last year, kids received tainted candy. 55 got sick, 31 died. It was all over the news, so I don't need to go into a background story that you already know. My girls, thank God, were lucky. They're both allergic to peanuts, so they just gave the candies to their friends. Friends they don't have anymore. I remember my shift in the ER where the kids started trickling in. It took a few days. The first one was on November 3rd, a 4-year-old girl named Regina. She was having trouble breathing. At first I thought it was an allergic reaction, but none of the treatments seemed to work. As she got worse, it was only after we scoped her to get a look inside her lungs that we realized what was happening. By then, though, it was too late. She died on the table. 3 more young kids came in that night. They too all died. The next day, the trickle became a flood. Older kids joined the younger ones, all with trouble breathing. These seemed worse off than the kids the night before. The initial symptoms had given way to the secondary ones before death, so we had to deal with the shock and terror they were experiencing as their condition progressed. The CDC representatives arrived not long after 10 more had died, and they were able to quickly trace the source to the contaminated candy. The local chocolate producer was determined to be at fault, and a speedy investigation revealed how exactly the candies were contaminated. The business was shut down. The owners are still tied up in court cases for their negligence and refusal to comply with proper importation safeguards. Like I said, after a year it's all still fresh in the minds of so many families. They will go their whole lives associating this holiday with death and devastation, rather than fun and excitement. Out of respect for that, few yards are decorated for Halloween nowadays. There are some pumpkins on front steps, but no real displays. Well, there'd be that one. A Japanese family who moved to town in August had been mostly unaware of the circumstances surrounding the tragedy. They'd bought the house across the street from me. Excited to celebrate Halloween in America for the first time, they decorated their front lawn with skeletons, pumpkins, monsters, spiders, everything you can imagine. A couple of neighbors visited them the next day and carefully explained what had happened the year before. The decorations were down within an hour. It wasn't that anyone was truly angry that the decorations were there. Most of them were fine. Had they just left 3 or 4 things up, no one would have complained. Hell, Some people lucky enough to have been touched by the tragedies might have appreciated a little Halloween spirit. But for some, seeing that one thing was just too much. Even I, who haven't lost anyone, cringed a little when I saw the setup. It made me think back to the night on November 3rd when Regina came into the ER. I remember the scope going down into her lungs. I remember how we stared at the screen in a combination of horror and fascination. It wasn't a skeleton, or pumpkin, or a monster that had killed these children. It was the spiders. The millions of tiny black spiders whose eggs had been in the cocoa powder decorating the finished chocolate and peanut butter candies. The kids who suffocated before the spiders had exited their lungs were the lucky ones. It was those in the waiting room or car or ambulance who hacked and coughed up clouds of them as they died, who had it the worst. The Japanese family apologized profusely as they removed all the decorations. It was obvious they were mortified. As I watched them out of the front window, I saw Gichi wave his wife Ai over to get a closer look at the front lawn. Her eyes widened as she put her hand over her mouth. I couldn't see what they were looking at, but I knew what it was. Ever since last November, there have been webs all over the place. They're small, only about the size of a quarter, but immediately recognizable as being those of some Honduran spider that had been accidentally imported by the chocolate shop owners. The town's infested with them. I try not to get too close to the corners and eaves of my house, because I know they're there. Harmless, but there. Just another cruel reminder, one of many. I haven't touched a piece of chocolate in over 350 days. I dread having to use the scope when I'm at work in the ER. And nearly every night, I dream about how it all happened, only to jolt awake with the feeling of spiders squirming through my lungs.
Regarding Eve by Easy Misery.
When they discovered Eve, the scientific community was buzzing. There had been instances of feral children throughout history, but none as odd as this. They found her in a mine shaft that had collapsed years before. No one cared much about the mine until a new developer wanted it reopened. They certainly did not expect to find a child amongst the rubble. Her age was estimated to be between 6 and 8. Evacuators also found 2 human skeletons alongside her, presumably those of her parents. It was believed that her family had been exploring the mine when it collapsed, causing them to be confined in a space about the size of a large dining room. They most likely survived on rock condensation and insects. It was unknown how old Eve was when they became trapped. Her parents must have died rather quickly. Their skeletons showed years of decay. Despite this, it seemed that Eve was fond of rubbing the bones on her skin. Certain bones, including the woman's pelvis and the man's skull, were nearly polished when they were found. Eve showed no signs of being taught to walk or speak, although she did make skittering noises with her tongue. Instead of walking on 2 legs, she preferred walking on her hands. This made her palms extremely thick with calluses. When she walked, her spine curved so that her thighs were close to her head, similar to the tail of a scorpion. When she was discovered, she fought viciously to stay in her hole. It took 2 grown men 3 hours to pry her from the rocks. They came straight out of the encounter with a variety of bites and bruises. Eve screamed for 2 days straight, not stopping to sleep or drink. Finally, she collapsed from exhaustion. Everyone was thankful for the silence. There was much debate as to who would take Eve. Clearly, it had to be someone who understood abnormal child psychology. Many scientists fortunately threw their names in, but only one rose to the top: Henrietta Rom. She was a brilliant young woman with a PhD in degrees in psychology as well as biology, mathematics, and engineering. She was in the process of setting up the Rom Institute. This facility would specialize in studying childhood development in unique and traumatic cases. Eve fit the bill brilliantly. She was transported to the institute, which was still in its infancy. Although the facility itself was incredibly large, only a few sectors were as yet in working order. One of these was the Athena ward. This ward functioned as a home for severely traumatized children. It was fully staffed with nurses, caregivers, and psychologists. Although one couldn't exactly fit in to this population of misfits, Eve would at least find a suitable living arrangement. Henrietta was keen to observe every second of Eve's life. Her room was kept small. 3 of the walls were padded, while the last appeared to be a dark black. This was of course a two-way mirror through which the scientists watched the girl. The room itself held few comforts. There was a cot with a thin mattress and pillow. In the corner was a small writing desk and chair. Otherwise, the room was completely empty. Eve's first day in the room was eventful. She woke up on the mattress after being sedated. Immediately, she flew off the bed and hid under the desk. The light from above seemed to burn her eyes. She stayed that way, crouched on her belly for hours. What was more, her eyes darted at every sound. Henrietta sat patiently behind the glass, watching. Finally, Eve crept out from under the desk. She walked as she usually did, on her hands. Her elbows were splayed, like an insect almost. She inspected the objects in her room with her mouth. She chewed on the wood desk and licked the metal of the cot. Eve seemed particularly disturbed by the cushion of the mattress. She grabbed it firmly with her feet and threw it against the wall. All the while she made these inhuman clicks with her mouth. Her head twitched constantly. She was never fully relaxed. She sniffed the padding of the wall, attempting to taste it. Realizing she couldn't wrap her teeth around anything, she started to climb. Her hands acted as claws as she scaled the side of the room. Her fingers bent in ways no ordinary humans could. She reached the very top where the wall met the ceiling. Henrietta watched silently as Eve began clicking louder. It sounded as though she was having a conversation. The clicking lasted a few more minutes before Eve dropped to the ground in a graceful leap, landing perfectly on her hands. She looked up directly into the black wall, directly into Henrietta's eyes. The next few days were odd to say the least. An orderly would enter 3 times a day to bring Eve her meals. She refused to eat anything that was prepared for her. Usually she would hiss at the orderly and spill the food across the room. On the 3rd day, Henrietta suggested changing her diet from the typical fare to a variety of insects. Fresh grasshoppers were brought in a plastic bag and left at Eve's door. Once the orderly had left, Eve descended upon the bag, ripping it open with her teeth and devouring the bugs in large, meaty chews. Henrietta decided that all of Eve's meals would now consist of insects. Everything was served from cockroaches to centipedes. Eve demolished each with no qualms. She even smiled when the meals were brought, a sight that looked strange on such a gaunt face. No attempts at therapy had been broached. Eve's violent nature and her distrust for humans made it difficult to even imagine sitting in the room with her. Plus, there was her clicking. She constantly climbed the walls and skittered incessantly. She was clearly communicating, but not even Henrietta could understand who the clicks were for. On the 7th day, the breakfast for Eve was a plastic bag full of spiders. The orderly left the bag by the door as usual. But this time Eve was utterly distraught. She cried out in what sounded like pain. Instead of hiding under the desk until the orderly left, Eve lashed out at him. She slashed his cheek with one of her razor-sharp toenails. Naturally, he screamed and pushed her away. Yet within seconds, she was standing on her hands again, ready to strike. Luckily, he made it out and shut the door before she could get to him. Henrietta did not react. She stared, transfixed, as Eve approached the bag. Eve had no interest in eating these creatures. Instead, she carefully used her teeth to rip a small hole in the bag. One by one, the spiders climbed out and onto her arms. Eve made her usual clicking noises, but also sounds of joy. It was almost like a regular child's laugh, except sharper. The arachnids swarmed her face, and she was practically giggling. There must have been nearly 20 spiders comfortably nestled in her hair and ears. Henrietta paged the orderly to come to her viewing room immediately. He appeared tired. A long red gash followed his forehead to his chin. Henrietta didn't even look at him. "What kind of spider did you feed her?" I don't know, Dr. Rom." Well, then you're useless. Find me someone with a brain." She waved him off. Henrietta could not take her eyes off the child, clicking happily as the spiders made their homes in her skin. When Dr. Rom wanted something, it never took long to appear. Within an hour, an expert on arachnids was at Henrietta's side. He was a nervous man who had no idea what to expect. When he saw Eve, he nearly ran out of the room. "Your name?" He jumped at Henrietta's voice. Cooper. Dave Cooper." "Well, Dr. Cooper," Henrietta droned, "I need to know what those spiders are." Dr. Cooper leaned in. It was a hard thing to look at, a 6-year-old child walking on her hands across a room covered in spiders. He lifted a magnifying glass out of his pocket and pressed it to the glass. I would guess these spiders are wolf spiders." "I don't care for guessing," she responded. Yes, sorry. Those are wolf spiders, definitely." He broke out in a sweat. "Tell me more." Her voice was strong and impatient. "Wolf spiders are fairly common in this area. These look to be on the large side, about 1 inch in diameter." He searched his brain for more facts. "Oh, and they're also sometimes referred to as the most maternal arachnid." "Maternal?" Henrietta turned her back to the glass to stare at Dr. Cooper. Yeah. I mean, not in a human sense, of course. But female wolf spiders will carry their young on their backs until they are old enough to survive on their own. This kind of protective behavior is unheard of in arachnids." There is no way to measure love in a spider, but if a spider could feel love, it would probably be a wolf spider. He had just finished his last word when an alarm sounded. Henrietta whirled round to see Eve's cell door open. The girl was gone. "What the?" An orderly ran in. Dr. Rom, we have no idea how she got out, but she's climbing the walls. We can't get to her." Henrietta stormed past him. "Get the tranquilizer gun. She'll need to be moved to the Achilles ward." It took 10 hours to capture Eve. She made it halfway across the facility, climbing the walls and the ceilings. Spiders of all sorts followed her from hallway to hallway. They rained down upon anyone who tried to get her. It was Henrietta herself who aimed the tranquilizer and shot Eve in the neck. The girl crashed to the ground, spiders scattering like rats. Her arms broke beneath her. As instructed, she was moved to the Achilles ward. Dr. Rom never mentioned her in public again. Upon inspection of Eve's room, 10 dead spiders had jammed themselves into the door lock so Eve could escape. It wasn't just wolf spiders. There were 4 different species that had sacrificed themselves for her. In the next month, Henrietta had the entire institute fumigated. Nothing could have survived the amount of toxins she pumped through the walls. The Achilles ward was heavily restricted, so only a few had clearance to work there. Although many different kinds of screams came from those haunted rooms, no one heard any clicking. With all the spiders dead, there was no one to click to. Eve's noises, the only ones that allowed her to connect to another living creature, went completely unanswered. Scientists believed Eve had survived in that mine alone, but it was only after she was found that she experienced true solitude.
Spiders by D0 Nutblink.
Spiders are an incredibly unique creature. Ever since I was a child, they've held my fascination like no other arthropod could. Did you know that spiders are the largest and most diverse subdivision of arachnids? So much that I bet you can't even name another type of arachnid other than a spider. Go ahead. It's hard, isn't it? That's all right. I'll give you a hand. Arachnids, to put it simply, are not like insects. They don't have any wings or antennae, and their bodies are separated into 2 tagmata, the cephalothorax and the abdomen. The scorpion, mite, and tick are all arachnids, but the spider is the most diverse of all. In fact, spiders are the 7th most diverse organism in existence, having over 45,700 different species. Imagine that. 45,700 different types of spider, each one distinctly different, each one a beautiful little monster. There are spiders on every single continent in the world. Well, except Antarctica. But why would any spiders want to live there? A spider really can live anywhere though, because they carry around the tools they need to build their home everywhere they go. Could you envision that? Perhaps you decide to go on a vacation, and once you're there you think, well, this is nicer than home. Perhaps I'll stay. So you get out your tools and build a home right then and there. Spiders truly are incredibly adaptive. Spiders eject silk from their appendages on their abdomen, which they use to create webs of all different shapes and sizes. The webs, although always a bit unique, follow a specific pattern and form depending on the particular species of spider. Some spiders' webs look almost like snowflakes with lovely spindles of silk crossing over itself to make various patterns, while other spiders' webs look more like a swirling cone of silk. All of the webs are striking and beautiful, much like their residents. Spiders are predators, well, except for the Bagheera kiplingi, which is a herbivore and shouldn't count as a spider. But unfortunately no one listens to my opinion when it comes to categorizing spiders. However, every other species of spider is a predator. The most well-known way spiders capture their prey is by using a web. The spider will place their web based on the type of prey in the area. Some spiders weave very small webs, which they stretch and release to target specific prey. Some weave even smaller, teeny tiny webs, hold them out between their first 2 pairs of legs, then charge and push the web as much as twice their own body length to trap the prey. And some spiders, like tarantulas, lure their prey in with trap doors, surrounded by strands of silk, to alert them to their prey's presence. I suppose I must relate to this type of spider. I lure my prey into my trap, whether it be a pizza delivery guy, UPS, or even the rare Jehovah's Witness who comes knocking. The motion sensors at my door let me know when someone has arrived, just like the spider's silk trip lines. And then I simply remove the bar from underneath the door on my porch, and my game falls right in to my web. From there, I treat my prey just as a spider would. I wrap them up nice and tight. Since I don't have any of my own silken strands, I have to use a combination of rope and cling wrap, but it does the trick. Once they're bound, we play all sorts of fun games. I know I really shouldn't play with my food, but it's just so fun. So fun. I love the way they scream and scream and scream. No one will ever hear them. My web is soundproof, so they can scream all they like, and oh, do I love to make them scream. I hang them from the ceiling, usually by their feet, and let all kinds of bugs crawl down the web. After all, even though my web is for big prey, some small treats make a tasty appetizer. My prey will scream and cry and beg me to let them go while bugs crawl over every inch of their bound bodies. But I don't let them go. I wouldn't be a very good spider if I did that. Once they start to get boring, and they always eventually do, it's time to eat. I haven't figured out how to liquefy my prey in true spider fashion just yet. But a liquid diet is important for a growing spider, so instead I slit their throat and collect it in a bucket, and that holds me over for at least a little while. Spiders, as you know, don't have teeth, and so neither do I, so I have to find creative ways to get the nutrition I need. Usually small bugs don't need chewing. I just swallow them whole and wash them down with blood. Unfortunately, I still have a great deal to figure out about my full spider transformation, which is why I'm writing this post. I'm hoping that if I post this here, I might be able to get into contact with a doctor. You see, spiders have 8 legs. I only have 2. Well, I do have 6 other legs. I just need someone to attach them. If anyone can help, send me a message. No price is too high. After all, even spiders have their ways of making money.
The African Bogana Spider by Vincent Finnolia.
Dr. Tweed, so nice to finally see you again. I trust you have many stories to tell me about your adventures in the deep heart of Africa. Dr. Tweed beamed with sheer delight as he greeted his colleague at the door. A red bow tie attached to the top of his khaki blazer gave the fellow an eccentric yet scholarly appearance. The old man squinted through his bifocals while beckoning Robert to the table where 2 cups of hot tea had already been poured. "Robert, my good man," he began. Yes, of course. Join me for some tea, and I shall regale you with a tale regarding the most curious creature this old man has ever had the pleasure of coming across in all his years of gallivanting around the globe." A friendly exchange of smiles and a pleasant handshake later, and the 2 men had taken their seats. "So, Doctor, tell me about this mysterious creature of yours." Dr. Tweed's eyes lit up like a pair of bright blue sapphires. Ah, yes. The African bow-honor spider. Named after the indigenous people who reside in a section of the jungle where the creature originally hails. It's a massive arachnid. I dare say the thing is about 1/2 meter in diameter. But that's not even the most interesting tidbit about it. Good God, man, Robert gasped. I beg your pardon, Doctor, but I'm finding it quite hard to swallow that your interest in the tremendous girth of this spider would be eclipsed by an even more fascinating factoid. The old man's lips curled into the slightest smirk upon hearing Robert's retort. Oh, but eclipsed it is, my dear friend. Perhaps you will understand once you hear this remarkable anecdote. On my 21st night of exploring the Dark Continent, we found that one of our pack mules had begun demonstrating bizarre and erratic behavior. The beast had started to crow and moan as though it was suffering from some sort of horrible illness. Our guides had previously warned our party that the primeval forest we made camp in was rife with poisonous asps, adders, and mambas, along with other deadly serpents, so I naturally hypothesized that it had fallen victim to one of the jungle's venomous vipers. However, upon further examination, I could find no evidence of teeth marks on the animal. No wounds, no pricks, not a single thing that would indicate it had been attacked. Sounds like quite the conundrum, Doctor. Indeed it was. Even more curious was the fact that, though I found the animal's behavior to be somewhat unnerving, many of our party's guides seemed to be downright terrified. At the sight of the mule's predicament, a few of them even ran off from the campsite and into the darkness of the untamed jungle by themselves. The fools! I loaded my rifle in order to put the creature out of its misery, as it was writhing on the ground and seemed to be suffering quite considerably. But before I had the chance to pull the trigger, my eyes witnessed a truly incredible sight. No, Doctor, you're not about to say... Oh, but I am. Out of the animal's mouth crawled the bow-honor spider. Dr. Tweed took a sip of his tea. Robert could tell by his friend's reaction that it was still a bit too hot to drink. Well, like I said before, it was colossal. I do love Earl Grey. I suppose I should let it cool a bit more before I enjoy it, though. But anyway, like I said before, it was colossal. Now, while I haven't quite figured out how the giant thing was able to contort its body enough to crawl its way out of the beast's jowls, I do have a theory about what it was doing there in the first place. Tweed paused a moment for dramatic effect, reveling in the sheer mystery of his account. Well, out with it then. I must say, good doctor, that I'm absolutely enthralled by this story of yours. You must tell me what happened next. As it turns out, this particular species of arachnid has become quite feared by the natives. Hence the reason why some of my party's guides had chosen to take their chances among the ferocious wildlife and poisonous flora of the jungle, instead of staying at the camp once they realized what was behind all the ruckus. The remaining guides insisted that I shoot the spider. But you know me, Robert. I am a man of science, and what kind of academician would I be if I ended the life of such a spectacular specimen? An anthropod of such astonishing peculiarity must be studied, alive. Robert interjected once more. But doctor, you still haven't explained what it was doing inside the mule's mouth. Have patience, my good man. All will be revealed in time. You see, the natives believe this spider to be some sort of soul-sucking demon, one that feasts upon the very life force of a man, bleeding him dry until he becomes nothing more than a withered husk. Obviously, an educated bloke like myself would dismiss such notions as nothing but foolish superstitions. But I do believe these primitive myths were onto something. Nevertheless, there is always a scientific explanation for these things. From my brief encounter with the creature, I have gathered that the 8-legged Goliath has evolved the most extraordinary of survival tactics. It appears that the spider entered our mule through its oral cavity. From there, it may have attached itself in some way to the beast's nervous system, granting it full access to the mule's movements and vocal patterns, essentially rendering the animal a useless puppet. What I'm saying, Robert, is that this creature was wearing our unfortunate ungulate like a hat on Sunday, and all of us were none the wiser. I have since postulated that the arachnid had made itself at home in the body of its hoofed host, feeding off its spinal fluid just long enough for it to plant a revolting sack of eggs. Robert's eyes widened with interest. What an intriguing yet horrifying creature, Doctor. Perhaps the guides who fled into the night weren't as foolish as you say. Could you imagine what would happen if a thing like that was loose here in England? People would be quite in a panic. He and the old man shared a chuckle. The doctor took another sip of his tea. Could I imagine, Robert? I dare say it already is. Dr. Tweed's head suddenly cocked back in a violent manner, terrible gagging noises emanating from his throat as blood began trickling from his eyes, ears and nose. 8 long, spindly legs emerged from his mouth.
The House Spider by Vera Stahl.
Three weeks ago, I went to see my best friend Kamiko in Japan. I had recently had problems with a guy I dated, Chet, turning stalkery when I broke things off, and I wanted some time away from dealing with that. More importantly, I was excited because I'd never been to the country, or much of anywhere, and I hadn't seen her in person since a few weeks after college graduation, which had been almost 5 years ago. She had lived in Tokyo for a couple of years when she moved back, but when her grandmother had died, she inherited the woman's home out in the country, about 20 kilometers from Osaki. It was a large house that had been in the family for generations, and based on the pictures she had sent me, I was excited to stay in such a neat place too. She came to pick me up at the airport, and after hugging and talking excitedly for a few minutes, we headed to her car. She seemed just the same as she always had, smart, funny, and full of life, but I knew her too well. I could see something was worrying her as we drove through the beautiful countryside, her pointing out this cool thing or that historic site with a fluidity that made me wonder if she was making up some of the facts and names as she went. I laughed inwardly at the idea of her making up tourist facts, but when she took a break from pointing things out, I asked her if everything was okay. She glanced at me with a nervous smile. "You always do that. Yeah, everything is okay. but I've been debating on when to tell you about the unique feature of my house. I had been smiling back, but felt the expression slipping away at her tone. What's that? Well, you know this is an old house I have, right? My great-grandparents built it over 100 years ago, and I had never been to it while my grandmother was alive. I could tell she was trying to build up her courage to get it out, and before I could respond, she finally did. Well, the house is kinda haunted. Kinda not really. Her voice went up at the end like she was asking for my confirmation. I raised an eyebrow. I'd been expecting her to say the plumbing was bad or that the wiring was wonky, not this. And kinda? What did that even... What I mean is, it's not a ghost. It's a yokai, which I can tell you don't know what that is. Okay. It's kind of a general term for a wide variety of creatures and spirits in Japanese folklore. And apparently, they're real, at least some of the time, because I have one. I felt disoriented. I'd have thought it was a practical joke, but Kamiko hated pranks, and I could tell she was serious. I considered if she was on drugs or having a mental issue, but knowing her, that seemed unlikely too, so I just decided to roll with it. Okay, weird. So what kind of things do you have? Can I see it? She nodded slowly. Oh, yeah, and it sounds way creepier than it is. It's just a really big spider. Unexpectedly, a burst of laughter pushed its way out of my throat. Heck, I thought you were serious. Kamiko was frowning and shaking her head, her eyes going between me and the road. I am, and it's not really a spider, at least not a normal spider. But it's about the size of, well, like that show Lassie. It's about Lassie-sized, and it's lived there since the house was built, at least according to the letter my grandmother left me when she died. It doesn't hurt or bother anything, or anybody, and most of the time it stays out of sight. Occasionally, it'll come out to watch TV, if I have it on. It likes game shows for some reason, but the best thing is it keeps the house immaculate. I blinked. Your border collie-sized spider ghost is a maid? She shot me back a look. Not a ghost, not a spirit, or part of a spirit, or whatever. But yes, it cleans. Never when you're around. And it has to be through magic, but I haven't had to lift a finger since I moved in. I turned in my seat to face her more directly. Okay, what's the deal? Is this a joke about me being messy? I don't get it. She sighed. I know how it sounds, but I don't want you being terrified when you see it, and you know I would have never invited you here if I didn't truly believe it's safe. It was weird for me at first too. Now I kind of look at it as like having a screwed up family dog that doesn't die. I opened my mouth to say something else, but I had no words. Finally, deciding I'd just have to let this weirdness play out, I said okay and settled back into my seat. When we arrived at the house, I was awestruck by how beautiful the house was. It was also very large, especially by Japanese house standards. We went through an outer gate and into a meticulously maintained garden. I gestured around and mouthed, "Spider?" which got me a withering look as Kamiko mimicked my gesture and mouthed, "Gardener." I grinned and shrugged, and then we went on inside. The interior of the home put the outside to shame. It was spotless, but I wouldn't have expected less from Kimiko anyway, and it managed to be extremely clean and orderly without looking sterile or uninviting. I glanced around, simultaneously happy to be there and nervous, and finally asked where it was. Shrugging, she led me deeper into the house. It's hard to say. It keeps to itself mainly, and won't ever approach you, even though it doesn't run if you approach it. I guess in theory it would let you touch it, but I've never tried. She gave out a short laugh. This sounds so weird actually talking about it to another person. She suddenly stopped and turned, giving me a quick hug. I'm really glad you're here. It wasn't until that evening, after we had eaten dinner and settled in the living room to watch TV, that I saw the yokai. I had caught motion out of the corner of my eye and started to turn when a shape I saw froze me in my place. If anything, Kimiko had underestimated the thing's size. It moved silently into the room and slowly moved up a back wall until it was perched against the high ceiling. I heard Kimiko's voice in my ear telling me to breathe, that it was okay, to go ahead and look at it. It was fine. It didn't mind. With great effort, I turned my head more to see it more fully, taking in its dark form in the flickering light from the television. It reminded me somewhat of a tarantula, but with large sets of black eyes, 3 smaller surrounding a larger on both sides of its face. I could feel it glance down at me for a moment, but then it seemed to go back to watching TV. If I had been anyone else, I would have run away right then. As it was, I spent the next day trying to convince her it wasn't safe for her to stay, and she spent another 2 convincing me everything was fine. Ultimately, she won out. I stayed for another 5 days, had a great time, and by the end, I actually waved bye to the spider as it crept across the foyer the day I left to return home. It glanced at me again, gave a slight nod, and went about its strange business. By the time I arrived home, the entire trip seemed surreal. I was also exhausted. I put down my suitcases, cleared out a spot on my messy bed, and fell asleep. I woke 5 hours later, and seeing the piles of clothes, the furry dishes in the sink, and the general messiness that I could only partially blame on preparing for the trip, I found myself wishing I had a ghost spider maid of my own. Shaking away this thought, and after a depressing look in the fridge, I went out for pizza. When I got back, everything was pristine. I felt a combination of wonder and terror. How had the spider somehow followed me here? That's when I saw my suitcase. It had been set against the wall and emptied, but when I got closer, I could see a small bulge in the front pocket at the top. The pocket was partly unzipped, and I used the light on my phone to look inside. There was an egg in there, a strange, leathery black egg the size of a large chicken egg, its surface shiny, except for intermittent dull flecks of green. Even at a distance, I could see the egg had been opened from the inside and was empty. I ran outside and called Kimiko. She answered sleepily, but woke up fast when I told her what I had found. She said her yokai was still there, but guessed it had a baby. She said she would try to find out what she could, but to be very careful, as not all yokai were the same, and that some were very dangerous. I debated going to a hotel room, but ended up going back in, promising myself that I wouldn't run at the first sign of trouble. When I entered, I saw it. It was halfway up the wall of the front hall, looking at me with 8 small eyes of dark blue, like sapphires. It was the size of a small kitten, and its legs and body were covered in what looked like white fur. Its head was the strangest part, as aside from its eyes, it looked more like the head of a weasel than a spider. I saw it open its mouth in a toothy yawn before giving me a small, warbling greeting. It was almost cute, which probably meant it would kill me and fill my body cavity with eggs. I regretted that thought and swallowed. Are we cool? I felt like an idiot talking to the little monster on my wall, but I just blurted it out. Then it nodded. Going to live here together and get along? Not hurt each other? Another nod. Okay, cool, I guess. We'll try it out. Welcome home. The creature gave what I decided was a happy warble and nod before moving away down the hall. In the days since, everything has gone very well. It's still bizarre, of course, but I've adjusted quickly and had no real concerns. Until this morning, when I found the body in the guest room closet. I had gone upstairs to get a raincoat out of the closet, but I had trouble opening the door. When I did, I saw a man's body wrapped neatly in silk webbing, sitting in the closet floor. I screamed, but before going into full panic mode, I realized the man was wearing a black ski mask. I studied him closer to the extent I could see through the webs. He had dark clothes, and a long skinning knife was clenched in his right fist. I recognized that knife. Chet used to carry it around in his truck the times we went out. I felt my stomach clench. I managed to slip the knife loose with some effort, and used it to free enough of the webbing to remove the mask. Chet's face was hollowed and drawn, and I could see that his throat had been ripped out. It's hard for me to say how long he had been there, but I had seen enough to know what had happened. I grabbed my raincoat and went out. When I returned home that night, every trace of him was gone. For the 10th time, I considered calling the police, but what could I say? In the end, I sat down and turned on the television. It only took a minute to find a game show to watch.